One of the joys of having your own channel on YouTube is that you can decide that you want to change your mind and there's nobody around to tell you that you can't. And as I was going to go on to chapter 3, I just felt so impressed that there was so much here in this one chapter that really needed some explanation, because you're going to be bombarded, if you haven't been already, with all kinds of stuff that's going to try and tell you something different here. This lesson, these verses here in this one thing, we could do a 4 to 6 hour lesson on at least, and just hit the highlights. I'll just start with in the beginning and talk about Caesar Augustus. All the world should be taxed. At the time Caesar came into power in Rome, there had been rebellions and wars and all kinds of things throughout the Roman Empire, and the Roman treasury was basically empty. And one of the things that Caesar wanted to do was, he's very, very conscientious man, very precise. He wanted to do two things. In all of the provinces of the Roman Empire, which was basically all of the known world, he wanted two things done. And this is what is talked about, world should be taxed, means here. He needed to have a listing of, a record made of all of the people that were in each of the provinces. And Israel was one of the provinces. Judea, where Pilate was one of the provinces. And the reason for having a registration was, if they had a war, the Roman emperor wanted to know how many men there were that he might be facing if they rebelled, or that he could call on to fight for him, as they would be called they would be known what was called as a levy. That is, he would say, I need 100,000 troops. And if there were 100,000 people that were men that were age 18 or 20 and older, then that province had better produce them, because that's what was on the rolls, that was in the register. Secondly, of course, once they were registered, you got an idea of how many people you could tax. The Jews were extremely upset at any census that might be taken or any taxes that might be made against them. And so we believe that although in every other part of the Roman Empire there was this registration and taxing, and it was part of the Roman way of doing it, and the Romans supervised it, that because of the touchiness of the Jews on this, and they're ready to rebel, these people were touchy as heck, that what happened was that Caesar turned it over to his buddy Herod to look after, and Herod looked after it himself. Just prior to this, we believe that Herod had actually been so desirous of making friends with Caesar and of being seen as a supporter that he required every adult male in all of Judea to swear a personal oath of loyalty to both Herod and to Caesar. So there's a lot of things that people don't know. Things that are not written down in here that we know happened because we have the historical record. And the people did not go to be taxed. They went to register by family. Luke here is looking back as hindsight. Of course, they levied taxes based on the figures they got as to how many people there were in each family. But the taxing was sort of how you would describe it after the fact. At the time, it was basically registering as families. And Joseph went up with Galilee to be registered with Mary to Bethlehem, and Mary went with him. I'm sure Mary went with him partly for each of two reasons. The first one was that because she was pregnant and they were only espoused to be married and not fully married, that there were women and men who were gossiping all the way through Nazareth about how horrible and she was and how she should be stoned and all the rest of it, that she wanted to get away from them. And when you're close to giving birth, you want to be around somebody that you love and somebody that loves you, and in this particular case that would have been Joseph. And so Basically, it says in verse 6, just this little verse, for such a universe enhancing thing, such few words. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. I marvel that so much promise and so much importance is said in those few words. She brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes. Swaddling clothes were like bands. They would be, and they would vary, they weren't a standard thing, but they would vary as pieces of cloth that would be long and might be 3 or 4 inches wide, and they could be wrapped all around the baby. Arms, legs, hands. Baby could be snugly tied up with the hands against the sides, whatever, to keep the baby warm and keep the baby still so the baby wouldn't move around too much. Laid him in a manger. I've had a manger before when I had goats and we had to have some place for the hay to be. A good place for a baby. There was no room for them in the inn. We make a great deal out of this, no room for them at the inn. Basically, they were used to camping out. This was the way you lived when you traveled. And everybody who lived in that area who was not living totally in a city, when they traveled, they camped out. And Mary would have known that this could have happened before she left Nazareth. She would have had friends who would have given birth to their children while they were camped out someplace. This would not be at all unusual. Here we learn the story about the shepherds. The wise men and the star only occur in that part of the story in Matthew. They don't occur every place else. And the angel appearing, the heavenly host, and the shepherds went to see the Savior, and when they were done, they went, and glorifying and praising God, verse 20. Now here's an interesting thing. I want you to pay attention to this. Verse 21, and when 8 days were accomplished for the circumcising of the child, his name was called Jesus, so they had a routine for that. And when the days of her purification, according to the law of Moses, were accomplished, women who gave birth were assumed to be ritually unclean, not physically unclean, but ritually unclean for, I can't remember, I think it was either 2 weeks or 4 weeks. They brought him to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. Now please note, according to the myths that are existing right now that we have, an angel appeared to Joseph as soon as the wise men arrived, and the wise men arrived the night the Savior was born, and then they fled to Egypt, and that is not true. Got to remember that Herod sent soldiers to kill the babies, all the babies 2 years of age and under. Herod did not know how old the Savior was. He didn't even know whether or not the Savior was in that town. But it had obviously been a long time between when the wise men had gone to Bethlehem and when Herod decided that since these guys were not coming back, he better kill all these babies if he could. And he didn't know that Joseph and Mary and Jesus had left Nazareth, had left Bethlehem and gone back to Nazareth. Here at, say, a month in, they're at the temple. At the temple, they meet Simeon and they meet Anna. And these two individuals prophesy that Jesus is the Christ. They have what their qualifications are. Long days of being very righteous. And then we learn about the incident of the last days. Before he was 12, they come to Jerusalem for the Passover. They assume that Jesus is with his friends doing whatever he's going to do, and they leave town and they're gone about a day, and then they find out that he's not there. He isn't with his friends, and they go back looking for him. And at the end of 3 days, they find him standing, talking to the doctors. These would have been the Jewish wise men at the time. And Mary says in verse 48, Son, why have thou thus dealt with us? Behold, we have sought thee sorrowing. And Jesus showed the love and impetuosity of youth, and he didn't have the people skills yet. How come? Didn't you know I would be about my Father's business? Well, of course they did. But he didn't have the people skills to let them know that first.